Hello, everyone, and welcome to a really fun video. I'm at least very excited about it. I wanted to go through and look at the Grand Finals last match, and just keep in mind there will be spoilers. If you want to go through and watch the CCL Finals, I recommend doing that first before watching this game, as I will be discussing the winner, and we are going to be covering the winning teams. But I wanted to go over this game because I've done this a couple times before. I love looking at the final game so that everyone can kind of see what everyone's strategies are. And this is currently the highest level of gameplay we have right now in Heroes of Storm, and this was an incredible match. Um, Now, spoilers ahead for everything. If you don't want spoilers, stop, go watch every other game. But for everyone that's just hanging out, either you've already watched the finals or you don't really care and you just want to watch a video. Um, every single game that was played in the finals and the grand finals, every series went the full amount of games that they possibly could go. These teams, the top four teams, specifically the top three teams, but the top four teams were so close in skill, and we weren't expecting them to be so close in skill. I think most people thought 30K would just kind of stomp every other team, but a couple maps were taken off of 30K in the series before, and then the grand finals, it went to the last game. 6 games were played, but it was best of 7, and one free point was given to 30K because they had never lost a series. And so we were in the grand finals. To talk a little bit about the draft, it was a wild draft. Cure had not picked his carry yet, his hero, and the enemies had picked Hogger, Diablo, and Lunara. And what happened was, because of the Diablo and Hogger, Cure generally will pick Thrall. The reason Cure picks Thrall is because he builds Thrall in a way to kill frontline, to kill beefy tanks. He takes the percent health talent on level 1, level 7, and sometimes even level 16 that allows him to do a ton of percent health damage. It's great because you get to play like Malthael, but you get to play Malthael that could be played in the 4-man because you can add CC to the game. So the way he plays Thrall, which I've been wanting to do a video with Cure on Thrall, and I probably will do one because his playstyle of Thrall is pretty interesting. He plays 4-man Thrall, he focuses on follow-up damage, and he focuses on anti-tank so you can kill frontliners. Because in this current meta, it's very common to have a bunch of frontliners. So that was the draft that was picked. And when Wildheart picked next, they grabbed Thrall, and they grabbed Uther, preventing 30K from being able to take Thrall as an answer to their heavy frontline. They also took Lunara to answer the common Uther counter, which is generally Lunara. She has a cleanse for Uther's stun, and she has overwhelming AoE damage that Uther usually can't keep up with. This left 30K in a weird spot at the start of the draft because they had to answer all of that in one go. They finalized the pick with Mephisto trading Cure's pick, which would have been Thrall, and they swapped so that Cure was on Sylvanas and Madara was on Mephisto. This is the final draft for Garden of Terror, and that's kind of how we got here. Now, my personal opinions on the draft, Hogger is going to be handling the majority of the camps for Wildheart. Outside of that, their camp clear is a little light. On the side of 30K, we have Rhaegar Sylvanas, who can do the majority of the camps, and potentially Blaze if he takes the level 1 talents, allows him to do camps a little bit faster. You need to make a decision with Blaze. If you're going to take those, you're going to take the lower cooldown on your CC. And against their team, they're going to have a couple different cleanses, so it wouldn't hurt to have lower cooldowns because you could stun, pop all of your stuff, they cleanse, and you'll have another stun to go. So it is definitely a game where you could take either or. But let's get into the game and talk a little bit about the decisions that are made this game and how we got to where we went. I'm going to fast forward through parts because I want to discuss a little bit about the strategies that these teams do in the early game, the mid game, and the late game. And I want to pause during certain situations. So early on, we always see that Sylvanas wants to try to get a quick turret, and we see that the enemy team noticed and took the bet on which direction would go, so the early turret doesn't happen. As we start getting into the later portions of the first fight, or at least the first portion of the game, we see that everyone is soaking every lane, both teams, and we see that both teams start making a priority to get the camps off cooldown. Both teams have chosen who they want to go get those early camps, so they're all soaking their lanes, and as we approach this first minute of the game, we see Blaze is immediately starting on a bruiser camp, and we see that there's 2 heroes that are going to replace Hogger, so he could start on a bruiser camp as well. My quick recommendation to everyone that is doing this and they want to know which camps to go for first, you should always go camps bottom to top. The reason why is the first objective of the game always spawns bottom, so the bottom camps are worth less during the objective. What I mean by that is if we get the top cams first and they're cleared before the objective, and then people are fighting over the objective, the team that got the top cams first are not going to have a distraction during the objective. So with 30k going from bottom to top, they're going to have an advantage on this first objective despite it being on the opposing side of the map. Where on the side of Wildheart, they're actually putting themselves at a disadvantage by going from top to bottom. However, the objective is on their side of the map, so they'll always have a default advantage because they'll be closer to their fountains being only right here. And with anyone that has any mobility, they can jump over the wall. They don't have anyone that can do that, but still, they're very close if they want to keep the fight here. Or even if they want to keep the fight here, then they can walk over, grab a fountain, and rejoin the fight. So this fight is heavily advantageous to Wildheart, even though they're doing the camps in the incorrect order. So, early portion of the game, both teams are focusing on soak, playing rather defensively, and working on getting their camps as fast as possible. 30k does the camps bottom to top, where Wildheart does their camps top to bottom. A little bit of a fight to get some value. If you get camps early on with a Sylvanas, you want to try to get some value because you can turn off the structures and get more momentum from the camps that are pushing. And we do see some damage going out. Haven ends up dying. Haven was playing rather aggressive in these games, and that aggression ended up being pretty terrifying for 30k. It was the difference between Wildheart beating both Oxygen and Wildheart taking as many maps off of 30k as they did. So it was, Haven's gameplay was terrifying. One of the scariest Diablos I've seen in a long time. Reminded me of like old Lauber gameplay when he was playing with, I don't even remember what team it was. Absolutely terrifying. We see again the solo laners are just kind of doing their own thing. 30k puts less priority on this because they don't want to take the risks about it. They just got a lot of structure damage without winning the objective, and they want to focus on playing a little bit safer. One thing to note about the drafts is that Diablo has a lot of his power at level 7, right? If you go Soul to the Flame and you go the reset on W, you have a lot of sustainability and AoE damage. If you go the auto attack talent, the burst one, then you bring a lot of burst at level 7. However, on the side of 30k, Johanna doesn't really get much until level 10. Sylvanas also gets a little bit, but nothing too crazy because you don't want to use your escape too early. We get the lower cooldown on Cleanse, but overall, the main power spike is in favor of Wildheart. So while the objective is in favor of Wildheart, power spike's in favor of Wildheart. So 30k decides to focus on getting structure damage instead of the objective, and they also focus on getting just playing safe. So once again, we have free structure damage that only traded for one objective, and we got towers in both top and bot, and a little bit of fort damage. That being said, Wildheart's also playing to their advantages here. They know that they have a stronger early game, so they're going to try to win all of the objectives early game so that they can get a large advantage before the enemy team starts scaling. This is also something that, with this added aggression that Haven's going to be playing, and Haven's always looking for these fights, the added aggression is going to give them a lot of opportunities throughout this game. So we see again, 30k, they want to stall this objective, but they probably don't want to commit too many resources into it. So we see Blaze deciding on whether or not he wants to go bot lane to cover some soak, or if he wanted to join his team. He's going to go bot lane, cover some soak, and he wants to delay IB Tings from going up into the other lane as well. So you can see when IB Tings mounts, he's going to mount, and he's going to go for this wave. Kira's going to cover this wave, so instead he's going to go for cams. You can see 30k is really putting more of a priority on stalling and getting to late game, where Wildheart's looking for threats. They're looking for kills. So they get a quick kill onto Cure, And they want to play aggressive. They want to win the early objectives, and they want to get a lead large enough to where they can just snowball the game. This is the last game of the series, and if they could snowball it, it would be huge for them. The Haven's playing aggressive. Weary Day's going for an objective. Cattle's going to be able to interrupt twice because of the two procs. I'll just throw the talents up here so you guys can see them. We've got the 2 charges of the E, and what is this? Zealous Glare is the Shield Glare is the 2 charges of Shield Glare. Haven still wants to play pretty aggressive. Now we have level 10s on both teams. So some of the interesting level 10s that we see Shockwave instead of going into Hortapult. So that means he wants to follow up generally. Hortapult usually is you want to disrupt. You want to jump into a backline. You want to slam people into your loot hordes. And you want to disrupt, be a little bit more selfish. When you go Shockwave, it's usually for interrupts or it's to follow up. So they really want to follow up on what Haven's doing. So they go for a Sundering to try for something. They use a Divine Shield just to deal with the mind control, and this fight's going pretty in favor of Wildheart right now because they were able to use fewer ults to deal with what 30k was bringing. Haven popped the CDR, or sorry, the spell armor, and they were able to win that objective without needing to lose too much. Hogger also wasn't even there because Hogger was clearing up the camp and getting his own camp at the same time. So they were able to win an objective without Hogger, and they were able to gain a lot of value. So this is where Wildheart starts taking the lead. Now the opposing team's going to need to get a little desperate if they want to be able to deal with the lead that Wildheart's created. So we're going to see 30k trying to force some fights right in here. They get a good fight onto Uther, taking out Uther very quickly. I don't know exactly why Uther was going up there. I think he wanted to get vision and potentially have his team go up to lead to a kill during rotation, and he probably wasn't expecting as many people to be there as there were. So 30k decides they want to just push top instead of going for this objective because they killed the enemy healer, and that's a cleanse out. So they think that they can go for these, but there's actually a pretty solid turn. Mason Blaze does a ton of damage to Cure. Haven keeps himself alive by using his W's and his spell shield, and Ivy Tinks also has self-healing. So they're all able to stay alive, stop the engage, and they still have an advantage for this next objective. 30k is desperate. They can't lose this objective this early on because the opposing team needs to get these leads. If Wildheart gets leads in their current comp, they're going to be really hard to deal with, and 30k needs to get to level 16. Level 16 is going to bring the percent health damage from Mephisto, and it's also going to bring the cooldown reduction on the blinds from Johanna. A lot of their big power spikes are at 16 and 20. So they need to get 16 and 20, and Wildheart knows that they can't let that happen. So both teams are playing a little safe right now. They're just keeping it in there. And again, it's the final game. Many games have been played today. There are a lot of nerves, so there will be light mistakes here and there, but for the most part, both teams are playing pretty safe. We see a play going up here as 4 people start approaching to go for Cure. And we see Zergling is playing pretty forward. We see Haven's watching to see if anyone rotates. And Haven's also kind of deciding if he wants to go over here. Mind Control's thrown out. Fishing Attempt was not landed. But everyone kind of resets again. Down in bot lane, we see Liam's just slowly taking down the fort, while Ivy Tings isn't really letting him get away with it. And we see Haven, Mason Blaze, and Weary Day just clearing up. Nobody's gone for this objective yet because it's kind of a bait. You throw any abilities into this, and you're wasting abilities that could be used in the team fight. And whoever pulls these actually do a lot of damage. They do 120 damage per attack. So if it's not a tank that's attacking it, it can be pretty aggressive. It can chunk. We see once again, Cattle starts working on this, but they don't see where anyone is. So Haven's just watching where everyone is, takes a quick peek. Nobody's on this objective. They see that Haven's there. He jumps in. They stun Madara. Don't end up going on to Madara. And so they're just playing safe. They know that they're getting a camp right now, and they'll be able to group up as 5, where the opposing team doesn't have a camp that they can get right now. Because if they go up here to go for this siege camp, which we can see Blaze on his way to, if they know that Blaze is going for this camp, which most likely they'll move this vision so that they can see if they're going for it, then they can go for this objective. But both teams are playing really safe. Now, this is in the advantage of 30k. Remember, 30k's team comp scales more. What I mean by that is, while Lunara's damage will increase, her level 16 in this build generally isn't that good. It's really strong damage over time, but keep in mind that we have a lot of healing over time coming out from Rhaegar, and we also have, in competitive games, fights need to happen fast, like that. Fights need to happen fast. And the talents that Wildheart gets is not going to be as effective as fights happening that fast as 30k's. 30k's is going to be able to blind the Thrall, which is a lot of their burst, is going to be able to blind the Lunara, which prevents her from getting that first couple stacks that Choking Pollen needs. And then also, it's going to be really effective at level 20. Level 20, if Cattle takes the Storm Shield talent, then Lunara will never be able to do good enough damage to health to ever be effective. So the longer this game goes, the more it's in favor of 30k. Haven makes a really, really aggressive play as the structures are turned off because of the objective. So he goes for a kill, a Great Ancestral comes out, a Cleanse comes out, and they go for IB Tings. IB Tings gets hit by the D shield, and nothing happens from this. When I'm telling you that these players were playing almost perfectly this game, they were playing so well. Every challenge that one team made was answered by the opposing team, countered by the opposing team, and the counter was answered by the first engaging team. And it happens every single time. It's like two boxers that are trading blows and blocking and everything. It's crazy, honestly. Is this the best gameplay we've ever seen? I think there were definitely better games in HGC. But as far as what we've seen in a long time, it's very, very rare. So we see a bit of an aggression coming here, but we do still need to answer this. So it's a 4v4 if they decide to fight here. Level 16, let me talk a little bit about some of the talents that we do see, just so we can see some notable ones. We see Burst coming out from Hogger. We see the percent health coming out from Mephisto. So now Mephisto can deal with all of their frontline. There's 4 frontliners, by the way. Thrall, Uther, Diablo, and Hogger. Mimic is going to be huge because it's going to allow him to deal with the people that are diving his backline and the people that he's diving at the same time. So level 20 is going to be really huge there. Again, Johanna is going to make her team basically unkillable with level 20 combined with the upgraded Ancestral. So level 20 for 30k is huge. Absolutely huge. Level 16 is in favor of Wildheart, though. They have the double stun. They've got multiple cleanses from the Abolish Magic to Hand of Protection and the Divine Shield. The accelerated contamination's okay, but it's just not generally as strong as the other level 16 talents. Debilitating Flames makes it to where longer fights are slightly in favor of Wildheart right now because they can lower the damage and look for more burst opportunities. And then we also have burst. So Wildheart's all looking for burst right now. Where on the side of 30k, we're looking for mind control attempts. Ooh, and this fight's kind of a strange one because it looks in favor of Wildheart in the beginning because the mind control was missed. But again, both teams answered it very, very well. We're going up to another objective, and this is where teams get a little bit of strategy added. We know that 30k is going to have a better scaled team. They've evened out in structures even though they've lost the same objective because every time that they lose a tribute, they've been getting trades. They'll give up the tribute, but they'll get some damage on structures. And so even though they lost the first objective, they're actually even on structures because of that strategy that they've made. And we do have 30k that will scale a little bit better than Wildheart. And so what's happening is we're in a situation where Wildheart needs to make a decision. They know they don't scale as well, so they're going to take the objectives. 30k knows that they can give up the objectives because they'll hit 20 before there's a major objective up, and they're able to give these up if they want to. But the more objectives that Wildheart gets, it's going to put 30k in a desperate position. Even if they're level 20 and they scaled better, they will be potentially losing in macro and they won't be able to give up another objective. So all Haven needs to do here is look for picks and force fights in between these objectives, and forcing 30k to answer so that Wildheart can win a couple more objectives. We're getting close to 20, so this is their last opportunity to take a fight before getting level 20s when they see Blaze down at the bottom and they can try. The 20s are picked up. What do we see? We see the upgraded bunker for the extra 25 armor, giving a 50 armor for anyone that goes in there, making diving from Zergling much more difficult. If Zergling wanted to dive on Hogger, he basically couldn't kill anyone because of bunker. And so that's why he went the build he went, is not for diving. We see Storm or the upgraded Storm Shield, blinded by the light, 25% of max health, and when you combine Holy Renewal and you combine Zealous Glare, you can basically activate this twice at the beginning of fights, giving 50% of max health as shields, which completely turns off a burst team, and it also prevents a lot of Lunara's damage. You'll be able to get a potential for a third blinded by the light if the fights go long. This fight gets crazy. Haven ends up using his Q to get out of the fight instead. A defensive sundering used to both damage Blaze, and they start going back in. They get an AoE Divine Shield protecting 2 people, and we also have an AoE Ancestral Heal to get everyone back to full. And now cooldowns were used by both teams, but we still have the potential for mind control to just try to grab someone. It's always worth trying once you hit level 20 because of the lowered cooldown. Every 15 seconds you can try for a fishing attempt. Now, we have 30k showing what they can do. Without using very large cooldowns, they're able to prevent the entire burst from Wildheart. So the only way Wildheart has to win now is to look for picks, quick fights, where the enemies are not ready for it. And so what we see is IB Ting start looking for some camps to get some macro advantage so that they would force the enemy to split up so that they could look for picks again. Level 20, some of the talents that they have, we have Windrush and Hellgate. Both are upgraded versions of Bolt of the Storm, and both have their own kind of flavors to them that allow them to be a little bit stronger. We have Forest's Wrath, which will allow Lunara to apply her apply her trait without needing to use auto attacks because she might be blinded, so she'll have the Choking Pollen easily applicable with her ult. Bulwark of Light is a talent that, if used while everyone's clumped, could be an absolute game changer because it can apply your ult to everyone. And then we also have no control. So if someone's isolated and low health, pop no control, it's a free kill. And if all the enemies are grouped up. So we see another mind control going out, fishing attempt, right? Cleanse goes out to stop the mind control, and so 1 cleanse is burned. We still have the abolish magic if it goes on anyone other than Lunara. And so with multiple cleanses, every 15 seconds there's a fishing attempt, but it's mainly just burning cleanses for right now. That was a bold one through an E to get closer to throw an R. And now we see a camp being pushed top. Hogger needs to answer the catapult in the camp. And when Hogger goes to answer the catapult in the camp, 30k wins the objective for free. Macro advantage right now is to 30k. The structures are the same, but they're able to get camps a little bit easier because they get to use less abilities to stay alive through this. They have a stronger healer that can keep up against Lunara. And they also have a stronger answer to the burst. So it's not necessarily that they outdrafted, but their draft was late game, and they played so safe early game that they were able to get to this point. I'll fast forward a little bit, but this game goes on for another 10 minutes, 13 minutes. So it's a crazy game, honestly. So as we start getting into this next fight, we know what Wildheart needs to do, right? They're looking for picks. We know what 30k wants to do. They want really safe fights together, where they're all grouped up together, and they can answer everything that the enemy team's trying to do. What Wildheart could do in team fights to lead to a win is either get a really big Bulwark of Light, or get a really big Sundering. If a really big Sundering happens, it splits the team in 2. It could be followed up by a Shockwave and lead to a kill before there's any reaction. So a Shockwave, a Sundering and a Shockwave hitting everyone on the enemy team would likely lead to kills before the enemies can react. So those are the 2 win conditions in team fights. The other win condition is for Wildheart to find picks, lead to a couple kills, and force team fights when the enemies are at a disadvantage. We see 30k going for a trade again, right? They gave up an objective and they got some structure damage down. We see a fight going out. 2 cleanses being used onto Cure. 1 to stop the initial CC and the second one to prevent future CC. And we do see the lowered cooldown on cleanse here so that it could happen more often. The second cleanse came from the Will of the Forsaken. Zergling's going for camps as Hogger does. Clears it rather quickly. We have 4 people going for a camp down here with 30k. We see a bit of a scary situation. 30k goes for a second camp here, and we see that Wildheart immediately goes to set up on this objective. We see that Cattle decides to go and use a blind to check this bush. Now he'll only have 1 blind to interrupt the first objective. He checks the bush. They end up going for an engage. The mind control gets cleansed the first time. The second cleanse comes out on the Durance. And then both teams are out of this fight if they want to be out of this fight. But if Wildheart wants to go back in, they do have that capability. All the cleanses are down on the side of Wildheart, and all the cleanses are down on the side of 30k. This fight right here is the objective point, so both of these teams want to take this fight, but the big cooldowns have already been used up here, Sundering and Bulwark, the 2 win conditions for Wildheart. So they really need to make this decision. Do they want to go into a fight that's probably a losing fight, or do they want to try something different? And so we see Haven dodges the mind control, uses W to interrupt the objective, and Wildheart's just looking for just that opportunity that probably won't arise, but they're trying for it, right? So we do see the what's it called? The shockwave go out. We see the big ult. Haven's in a rough spot. He teleports to get out, and Ancestral fully heals 30k. So that opportunity was so close to being a kill, but it didn't go on who they wanted it to go on, and Wildheart's going to have to retreat. They don't have the healing to get everyone back up because they have an Uther main healer, so they need to back up. They need to heal up, and they need to make this quick decision of, if the enemies split, we can try to go for picks. If the enemies stay grouped, we need to clear up all the objectives so we don't lose anything major on this objective. Wildheart decides to group up to prevent the enemies from getting too much off of this, and they use a lot of AoE damage to do almost 70% of Cure's health. We have Madara go in and do a large amount of damage to Zergling. Goes in again, gets flipped by Haven, and Haven realizes his mistake and flips him back, or pushes him one way and flips him back to try to get him away, but Hogger ends up dying, and we go 30k's attempting to go for a couple more kills. If they get 2 more kills here, they could lead to the game. But Wildheart plays safe, and they don't let that happen. So, what's happened so far in this game, right? 30k knew their power spikes weren't until level 10, so they waited, right? Wildheart knew that their power spikes were early, so they forced fights early. 30k lost the first objective, but they took trades on every objective that they lost, so that when the actual Garden Terrors would arise, they would only lose the same structures that they have already taken. And so the early game, 30k played it exactly to their comp. Wildheart also played it exactly to their comp, but because they drafted to counter Cure this game, they ended up with a team comp that was just a tad bit weaker than the opposing team comp. Cure picks Thrall to deal with double frontline. Generally, when it's double to triple frontline, he needs to do percent health. Where they already kind of had that answer. They already had the Thrall on their side, and you don't generally use Thrall. Sorry, they already had the Diablo on their side. You don't generally use Thrall to deal with a Johanna. You use Thrall to deal with a Blaze, a Hogger, a Diablo, and so they were in a weird spot because they already picked Lunara, and so they didn't really know exactly what they wanted to do. Because 30k knew their plan and only had to adapt 1 pick because of the Thrall, they were able to adapt pretty easily, where Wildheart overthought the draft, I think. Overall, both of these teams have played incredibly well. I mean, Wildheart did better than I think anyone expected, too, because during the overall games going forward, Wildheart, I think, was averaging on most people's like power ranking tier list between 3 and 4. Based off of their play and the players' individual skills, they were sitting between 3 and 4. Most people were expecting Storm and Diamond Hands to be kind of like trading between third and fourth, and Oxygen to be trading between first and second with 30k. And then Wild Heart would be kind of a mix between third through fifth, depending on where things were. But look at the shields. Do you see how Modern ended up with a giant shield, but their entire team ended up with huge shields because they're double blinded by the light? And it's just going to prevent the enemies from going anywhere. So overall, Wild Hearts played incredibly well. I mean, they almost won the entire series too, which is crazy. Again, I did say that there were spoilers this game, so I know I'm going through everything, but this is such a wild game, and 30k is playing so safe. And some people, even in the chat, were saying that 30k was playing a little too safe here. But when you're ahead, it's really hard to lose if you play safe, because if you play safe, the enemies can never really get any kills, and you can get whatever objectives you want. You can clear up whatever objectives you want. If you play aggressive, the enemies can generally answer aggression easier. So the only way 30k really loses in this situation is if they throw, or if like Wildheart takes a huge risk and it pays off. But taking huge risks generally won't pay off. Mind Control goes out, first cleanse goes out, second cleanse goes out. So that's 2 cleanses being used on the Haven. The last one that they have is Divine Shield, so everyone backs off. No Divine Shield is used. And that's 3 cleanses used for just 2 low cooldown abilities. We have another fishing attempt going out, 15 seconds, and that would have required Divine Shield to answer if it would have landed. Madara goes in, does about 60% of Haven's health in one go. Storm Shield goes out, giving large shields to everyone on their team. And again, they reset with very low cooldowns being used. They didn't really need to use anything. Multiple stuns go out. This time D-Shield would be required to get him out. D-Shield was used on a different target. Zergling ends up getting out using the Estoppel. Another Storm Shield goes out, giving large shields, preventing all the damage over time that Lunara went. Uther, main healer, takes up too much time to get everyone topped off, and Rhaegar, main healer, gets everyone topped off. It may seem like I'm making Uther seem like a bad main healer. He's not. It's the situation that they're in, that they have an answer to burst and they have an answer to sustain, where Uther is generally best if you're going against a team that doesn't have answer to burst, because Wildheart needs to force with burst. We have Weary Day channeling, and we have Wildheart basically preventing everyone from stepping back up. All the abilities were used, and Wildheart played that so perfectly. They were able to go back, kind of hit a fountain, and then get back in there. But we do have some damage going out, right? We've got this objective that's not going to do anything. Bottom objective is going to be pushed in. This is Wildheart's chance to potentially end the game. And so right here, that goes out. 1 cleanse gets used onto that. It was just the Abolish Magic. And we have Haven taking a bit of damage, but he can heal back a lot of it. We see he healed back about 10% because of his W talents that he has. And so doing the same thing, he dodges the mind control, gains back a portion of his health, and we'll have Weary Day try to heal everyone up a little bit. Gets a Q out, and Haven throws out a W, heals about 10% of his health, and they need to decide if they want to go in here. We see Zergling going in, goes unstoppable to get out, gets healed back up. We see Haven looking for a chance to maybe get a stun on a wall, goes in for a stun, Storm Shield goes out, realizes he can't fight it, and they all back off. Unstoppable before the both unstoppables were used to get him out. A nice root prevents 30k from continuing this engage. They deal with this last objective, and this is the time that Wildheart needs to look for a pick. You would think, and this is where a lot of, I would say, even some of the best teams would make this mistake. Most teams here would have backed. They were a little low. They have structures that might be a little in need, and this objective is almost dead anyways. Most teams would back right here. But Wildheart knows that this is their best opportunity to look for a pick. They're going to use abilities to clear up this, and there's a chance that the enemies might split up, where a couple of them might go bot, or a couple of them might look to grab some camps afterwards. This is Wildheart's best opportunity. So not only did Wildheart make a huge decision here that is a really solid decision, but 30k also predicted this decision. Cattle specifically sat in the only bush that Wildheart could look for a flank here. And where, again, tanks of a lesser team might go down here and think that they're protecting their team by being near them, Cattle realizes that if he's here, not only can he dismount everyone with his E and tell his team to back off, which would save his team, but he could also stay in the bush and not say anything and wait till they get closer and potentially land a subdue and 80% slow that his team could follow up with a mind control and endurance. So he gets to make a quick decision with his team that says, hey, they're all coming over here. What do we want to do? And if his team reacts quickly, they might be able to turn on Haben. Remember, Divine Shield's down, Sundering's down. So there's a chance they could take out these 2 low health targets before the targets could react. This is such an integral fight because both teams played it perfectly and both teams reacted to the perfect play again. Cattle's not sure if he wants to leave, and he's not sure if he wants to engage yet. And so it looks like his team is approaching in case he does want to engage, but at the same time, he hasn't made a decision yet. His team shows up, and he decides to turn on the enemy team. We have the subdue go out. That's the 80% slow. That means it should be followed up by a Durance. Durance is being casted right here onto the Diablo. And so now that we know that we're engaging into the fight, Unstoppable is going to be procced. Storm Shield's going to be procced. And then we're going to have the stun, and we're going to have a lot of follow-up. We also see the stun coming out, the shockwave coming out, because this is Wildheart's only opportunity to look for a pick, is right before the Storm Shield comes out. Cattle gets close to his team, so he's ready to Storm Shield. Storm Shields his whole team, which means that Lunara and Hogger are not going to have enough damage to kill them, and the disengage is not going to be available for the Divine Shield, but disengage has to happen here. So what's going to happen is Diablo is just going to take the hit, right? Pop Storm Shield, pop Lightning Breath to try to zone out so that his team can get out. If this worked, if Cattle wasn't there, Wildheart would have gotten a couple kills here because they could have sat in this bush, and when the enemies walked away, they could have killed 2 or 3 people. If Cattle was there, it's a risk they still had to take, because if 30k cleared this without any backlash, then when Wildheart backed, 30k could have taken all the camps, and then the overwhelming just push and macro of the other lanes would have led to this. This right here is the risk that Wildheart had to take, and there's a good chance it paid off if Cattle wasn't where he was. Haven ended up healing enough with his W, but he ends up getting taken out here. There's his souls, and the rest of his team gets out. It was a big risk, and they played it well enough to where the only thing that they lost in that risk was 70 souls. Was more than 70 souls? 75 souls. So now 30k is going to do what they were going to do. They're going to take all the camps on the map, and they're going to make sure that they're set up for the macro. Wildheart decides they can't take all these camps. We need to try for something. We've got Sundering up, and we're going to have Divine Shield up soon. But I think they end up just thinking against it. They answer the macro, and they avoid 30k. They let 30k take the camp, and they go deal with all the camps, giving 30k 1 more objective point, getting closer to getting the full objective. Once again, 30k is playing safe. They're in the lead. They don't need to play aggressive. Their heroes have scaled, and they're in their best position to continue fighting. $30k doesn't need to take a risk over this siege camp because it's just a siege camp, right? Siege camps are instantly cleared. No one needs experience on either team, and they want to use all their abilities to win the objective because the next objective ends the game. So right now with 30k, they've put the enemy in check. What I mean by check is if you were playing chess, they've put the enemy in a position where the enemy has to get themselves out of check. Check right now is there are 2 catapults pushing top. This camp only pushes mid, and the next objective, wherever it spawns, is game for 30k. So 30k just needs to keep putting the enemies in check. So they need to deal with these catapults, and they need to deal with this camp, and then they can get themselves out of check. But then when the objective spawns, they're back in check. So they need to win an objective fight to get themselves out of check. And it's just a constant game of 30k putting them back in check. And if they get into 2 different positions, then, for example, they need to create a checkmate, which is 2 different win conditions that the enemies can't answer both. So we see Haben checking this bush, and we see IB Ting's Mason Blaze working on this cam. Zergling sitting in a flanking position in case the enemies do show up. He can go and try to zone out the backline to get his team out. He might die for it, but he at least would save his team. The next objective is spawning in a favorable position for 30k. Vision is being used to check this bush first. We do have Sentinel Wisp, so as long as this stays in this bush, it'll reveal any of the Fog of War in this area too. And we see that no one is hiding in any Fog of War areas, so Wildheart's pretty safe. Mind Control goes out. It's instantly cleansed by Abolish Magic from Mason Blaze on that Lunara. And we've got the oil checking the flanking position here to make sure that the Hogger's not in that position. We see Liam take out the Sentinel Wisp, and they're in a rough position. Haven goes in, and we also have IB Tings going for their backline, trying to zone out their backline long enough to where they can kill Liam. Liam's taking a lot of damage, so he uses his bunker, and then we also have a Lightning Breath go out, almost taking out Rhaegar, but Liam goes back in to save the Rhaegar, ends up taking his death there, and a trade for Hogger. Both of the backliners, or both of the soul laners, did what they needed to do, but I'm going to pause at this moment, because this moment right here is checkmate. So, because of the team comps, the large shields prevent Lunara from doing enough damage to get people below that 50%. Because they never get below the 50%, and having a Rhaegar healer allows them to get everyone topped back off to full. The Uther healer cannot get everyone topped off to full, so this is a desperate point for Wildheart. They never answered those two catapults that were up top. They grabbed the camp mid and forced a fight. We have 4 catapults now pushing top lane. They can't back because then they're going to lose the objective. They can't win the fight quickly because the enemies are all full health and they're not in the comp to win the enemy full, or to win this team fight. So Wildheart has just been checkmated right here in this position. And they didn't do anything wrong. 30k just played better, and that's literally all it was. 30k drafted to win. They knew their win condition, and they played to their win condition. Wildheart drafted to not lose. They drafted to counter cure. And that ended up resulting in them having a great draft, but not a perfect draft. Where 30k had a perfect draft. They played exactly how they wanted to play. So they were just checkmated here 30 minutes into a grand final that went all the way to the last game in the series, where Wildheart came out of nowhere, beat all the teams that were considered favorite teams, and they end up losing to catapults. It's a rough position to be in, but 30k played this perfectly, and this was an amazing game to watch. And I recommend watching the entire series. The Wildheart versus Oxygen games were incredible. Everyone was favoring Oxygen going into those games, and Oxygen played incredibly. And that was the thing that was so interesting to watch, is Oxygen was so impressive in those games and still lost, because that's how good Wildheart was. And Wildheart was so impressive in these games and still lost, because that's how good 30k was. Great games to watch. Very excited for the games to come up. We've got like the Miami Cup coming up. We've got a few other events as well. There's a big event coming up in Europe. We've got, I think, Masters Clash is coming back in Europe as well. So keep your eyes out for a lot more Heroes Esports to come. I know I said, Blizzard's not going to be doing a lot of patches with the game anymore. We still see some esports. It's kind of like StarCraft. There's still major StarCraft events. StarCraft still watched. Their pro scene is still one of the largest viewed pro scenes. I think they're in like top 5. And HOTS Esports is kind of still in that boat. The other thing too, I know one of Caldor's events that he's running, he has like a special rule set too. So it's almost like a balance patch if you create your own rule set for it. But yeah, overall, that is the grand finals. It's a sad way to see the game end to minions, but sometimes that's how the most calculated wins go. You put someone in check with minions and they don't answer that check, because that was the check that they didn't answer. It's that pawn that's been sitting by your king forever, and you try to answer everything else, but that pawn is still making its way to your king. You've got to answer it eventually, even if it's not a big threat. And that's exactly what 30K did. Now, 30K was also in that same position though. So if they if Wildheart prevented backs and they didn't, and they still had a keep here, then Wildheart could have potentially won. Right? I mean, one of them might be able to back here and give up the objective. Say they Johanna scoops everyone up and you have Cure who backs and then turns off the minions. So there was a higher chance that 30K could have answered that situation. But it was definitely a situation. Both teams were in a very, very similar situation. So that is how the final game ended. Thank you all for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos.